Okay, Reglas, welcome to day 2 of Revolutionary Relationships. And today we are talking about domming your defenses. And yesterday we talked about the interaction of intimacy, really understanding ourselves as energy matrices that have been influenced and shaped by our early experiences, attachment experiences, relational interactions, early learning around relationships, how relationships work, how much intimacy is available to us and how much isn't. And so these energy matrices are shaped, right, by these early experiences, and they're always, when we are with someone else, especially when we're by ourselves, they have their shape, but when we're with other people, they're moving, right? They're moving with ourselves, but with other people, they're interacting with other energy matrices, and there's sort of things always in flux, things always moving. And that a lot of what limits our capacity for intimacy is the experience of fear. And this fear is very, very subtle in the body. It's not an overt anxiety. This is usually when we notice anxiety, but when we are able to track those subtle experiences of fear in our body, when we're interacting, when we're in intimate situations, we have the potential and the ability to deepen the intimacy. So today we're going to talk about the 5 most common intimacy wounds and the subsequent energetic relational strategies that form. And these strategies reflect the ways that we try to create safety through power and control, but that actually block intimacy, wholeness, and heart-aligned pleasure. And so the reason why we create safety through power and control is because we're just, the nervous system is just sending out signals that whatever's happening is unsafe. But it really, I want us to have compassion around it. It's not that we're intentionally attempting to exert power and control, but it's really just about safety. Okay. And these energetic strategies kick in usually harder when we're under stress, when we're under stressful situations, when we're having a conflict, when we're getting triggered in some way, when our nervous system is already at capacity, right? When we're already overwhelmed, that's when these start to kick in. So, so what I want to say is that we either love and lead from our healing, or we love and lead from our wounding. And this applies to entrepreneurship, in our families, and in our relationships. And of course, again, it's not about perfection, but when we do love and lead from our wounding, those moments happen. And when we are able to recognize what happened and why it happened, although the why isn't always necessary, but when we are able to catch ourselves and say like, oh yeah, it's because I was afraid of this, or because this vulnerability came up, then we can also bring that to the repair process and again, have the opportunity to deepen intimacy. So when we see the strategy, we have choice. And when you have choice, you have freedom. You can choose liberation in that moment, and you can choose sovereignty, right? So this is an invitation for you to be an energy dom, right? To track your energy. But of course, you can't track what you can't see or feel. And we often, with our energetic strategies, we often justify them, right? When we have a difficulty trusting, when we don't trust or we won't trust, then we will look for evidence in our environment. And when things happen, we're like, see, that's why I shouldn't have trusted. And that keeps the strategy in place instead of recognizing like, yeah, I have a thing in me or a part of me that won't trust, that won't allow trust to happen. And that part of me is getting triggered. So it's not all of who we are. There are parts of us, right? Because there are other parts that are wanting to be really close and open. And there are then the fearful parts. So going back to, you can't track what you can't see or feel. And these energetic strategies, they operate in the unconscious realm because they were formed, from, pre-birth into age 6. And a lot of times before you had the capacity for language, when you were just absorbing your environment, when you were just absorbing your parents' energy matrices, because that's what you were mapping onto in this, time when you were forming attachment bonds. So knowing your energy matrix creates more space for you to be in your truth from an embodied sense. And it allows you to be more courageous in your showing up, in your love relationships, in your business, in all areas. And of course, when I talk about revolutionary relationships, I'm not just talking about sexual relationships. I'm really talking about creating intimacy also as part of your business, instead of this, this detached I'm just going to sell to you. No, it's really about bringing people in, about taking care of people, and really leading with your values in your business as well. So I want to also, just before we get into the 5 energetic strategies, to say that part of the benefit of knowing these energetic strategies is that it opens up so much more space for compassion. You can hold a bigger space for the people you love and serve. Because when somebody is acting out, whether it's your child or whether it's your partner or partners or even your parents, there is so much more space when you can see these energetic strategies within yourself. And when you have a aligned and compassionate relationship with them within you, you can also offer that compassion to the people in your life. When they're acting out, you can not take it personally, right? Because you can see what you see in yourself, you can see in other people. And for me, that was the biggest gift, because I was someone who was I'm still sensitive, but I was very sensitive interpersonally. And I would take things personally when somebody distanced themselves, for example. I would think it was about me. And, maybe part of it was about me, but I don't take all of that on now the way that I used to. I used to get really down when people would separate from me, but I would recognize now, like, oh, this person has a leaving strategy, and that's just what makes them feel safe. So what triggers us, right? Triggers are opportunities. What activates us? I like to use activations rather than triggers. What activates us has us going to survival strategies that go back to those intimacy wounds. And it takes us back to some of our most primal and vulnerable places. And so healing these intimacy wounds really builds capacity, nervous system capacity, which, is all the fucking trend right now. Like, everybody's talking about nervous system capacity, but the reality is it's what it's all about, because that just creates safety within your own body. And, even when life gets really, really crazy, you can still show up, even when like things are chaotic. You can show up for, in business, you can show up for a launch that, that takes up a lot of energetic space, or you can show up for your clients and not, and be of highest service. And you can show up for your children, even when like things are a whirl around you. So let's get into the basic energetic strategies. Okay. So again, these form in your early relationship with your caregivers and the environments that you grew up in. It includes systems, school systems. It includes the socio-political structures, right? Like white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism. And because most of us don't receive this full mirroring or adequate nourishment as children, these survival strategies, they feel normal to us because they form so early. It's sort of the only thing we know. And they're the only thing we know until we come into interaction with other energy matrices and we get activated. And these activations give us the opportunity to look into them more deeply and to transform them. So the habitual piece is why they feel normal. And the patterns, the strategies are based on how the stream of life force energy and awareness habitually moves through the body, especially in times of distress and overwhelm. So this is energy moving in the body. So, okay, so let me see. Okay, so like one thing that I want to say is like because they form so early in our lives, it's like we're looking through a broken window and thinking or believing that what we see through that fragmentation is real. And then our bodies adjust to that fragmentation. We perceive it as reality. And in fact, it is not our reality. Your reality is that your capacity for intimacy is so much bigger than what you know. So the first energetic strategy is the creative strategy. And this is a strategy that moves away from others to stay safe. So I want to first highlight the positive aspects and gifts of each strategy. So people in the creative strategy are really sensitive to and aware of energy. They're right, like they're the deep feelers, the ones that like those of us who have like antennas all around. They're creative, playful, joyful, and really, really sensitive. And many empaths have the creative relational strategy. So the difficulty, the challenge of this strategy is that there's difficulty with full embodiment. This is also called the leaving pattern, the leaving strategy. People in the creative pattern or strategy they have difficulty feeling grounded in their bodies. They tend to be up in their heads. Their energy tends to be up and out a little bit, and they seek safety through leaving energetically. They need to leave or escape situations physically by physically removing themselves or by limiting the amount of contact. You know, this is a person perhaps that will go to a party and just kind of like, whoa, I need to get out of here, or during a conflict leaves. It can even show up in really subtle ways, like you're the one to say goodbye first, or you're the one to leave a relationship first. You're the one who has maybe one foot out or knows where the exits are, you know? So the wound of this is an energetic wound, and not all wounds are energetic. So this one is definitely energetic. But so in this wound, or in this, like, for example, in this environment, let's say, the environment was perceived as hostile by the child or the incoming spirit. So the wholeness of the energy, the wholeness that you're inherently born with, was scattered in all directions. And so there is this holding in, right? This attempt to contain the energy. And the default emotion is fear. So there's, you know, some of the ways this comes up in the mental space, and I'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about, actually, no, we should talk about that. I don't know. I think we should probably talk about it today. There's this thought that of not mattering, or this fear that they might fall apart, and like they find the experience of being human overwhelming, and there's a fear of living in the body, in the human body, as an individual, like they might fall apart or lose themselves in the process. And the task is to integrate and individuate and embody. That is the work, and that's, again, through breath, movement, and voice. This is how we work, healing these intimacy wounds. So the second intimacy wound is the merging strategy. And this is a strategy where we move towards others. This tends to be sort of like a codependency pattern. And this is the positive aspects and gifts of the merging strategy, also called the lover, which I really like, is that they're really caring, they're super nurturing, they're loving, and they have a tremendous capacity for pleasure. And lovers are also really generous with their giving. And many helpers and healers use this pattern, they use this strategy, right? So the difficulty with the strategy is around their needs. People in the merging strategy struggle to receive, they struggle to be held, or they have difficulty with accepting help and digesting what they receive. Like, for example, somebody gives you a compliment and they don't receive it. or you don't receive it. It sort of slides right off you like Teflon. But you are the first person to offer compliments, to offer help to other people. You know, there's a seeking of safety through merging in relationships and through codependency. Merging strategy people tend to get into relationships where they might be the helper or are the helped. So there's two types of this, and I'm not going to get into that detail, but there's one type that is like where the need is very apparent and they sort of energetically collapse into the other person. And there's the type that is where the need is not felt, where other people need, but they don't. And so there's a hyper independent kind of layer on the outside, but underneath is what is actually going on. So the wound here is that the parent was not able to meet the needs of the child. And the wounding is physical and interpersonal. The child didn't receive literally enough nurturance and love. I was like, do I share how this shows up for me? I was like, I don't know. No, not today. So the effect of the wound is that there's a sensation of not being able to feel full, right? There's a sort of an empty feeling, usually in the lower belly or around the heart, depending on how the wound happened. But there's a fear of deprivation, or that deprivation, the sensation of deprivation can often activate the wound. There can be an overindulgence in substances like food, drugs, or shopping in an attempt to fill up. And sometimes people in the merging strategy project their own needs onto others, like I was saying earlier, and identify as the giver while denying their own needs, right? So it's like, if I need, I'll be abandoned. So, and the default emotion is shame particularly around the need. And they doubt the right to have need, and they doubt the right to really have and hold in their bodies. So even when they receive, it slides off them like Teflon, or when they receive, it leaks right out of them. And I know people who, for example, they've received large amounts of money because they have a certain job where they receive large sums for a job that they do. And as soon as they receive the money, they spend it, right? They're not able to hold it, and it leaks, like they don't hold, it leaks right out of them. And that has to do with nervous system capacity, because they weren't allowed to, like there wasn't enough nurturance and holding for them. So there's this fear of not having enough of anything. And it's like, you've probably been in that narrative where it's like, oh, there's not enough time, or there's not enough money, or there's not enough, right? There's a fear of abandonment. There's a fear of deprivation, rejection. That's all part of the merging strategy. Okay, so the third strategy is the enduring strategy. And this is the energetic pattern is to pull in and down. And so these people tend to be very like earth grounded, and it's really great to be around them sometimes because they have stamina. They are really grounded. They're steady. They're patient. They're diplomatic. They're just like, they're super supportive. Think of them as like this trunk of the tree that people can lean on. The difficulty is with self-expression, with taking action, with claiming your space. And they tend to seek safety through hiding their authentic self deep within them, because they pull the energy in and down, and they resist other people. So they tend to say yes, but they actually mean no, but the no is hidden. And they tend to turn their will against themselves. So in the wounding environment is that the parent was intrusive, they were dominating or authoritarian. And the wounding here is interpersonal. The child might have felt invaded, humiliated, and punished for expressing their autonomy, for expressing that no, that really primal no. So within your own body, if you have this strategy, if you use this strategy, let's say, you can't control your own body and your space because you're having this sort of helicopter invasive parent. And there's a fear of self-expression and action because from, in the authoritarian parenting, there's this blocking energy of like, you can't bring that. And so there's self-negation. This is where we sabotage ourselves. We engage in passive aggressive behaviors. And so there's this internal double bind around the yes and the no. Like, I want to say yes, but I won't give myself permission to do that. And I want to say no, but I feel guilty when I say no, right? And that's one of the default emotions is guilt. The other is resentment, right? Because when you want to say no, but instead say yes, then resentment builds up because you're betraying yourself ultimately. And there's this illusion that they operate in because they're trying to please other people, but they're actually harming themselves in the process. And so they doubt their right to act autonomously. So they tend to seek approval of other people. And at the same time, they also fear invasion. They fear being exposed or humiliated or to be controlled. And so in this fear of being controlled, they control what other people see, right? So they hold it in really, really tight. Okay, so hopefully that is making sense. And I'm sort of wondering how you're feeling in your body as I name some of these, if you can sort of feel yourself in the strategies. So the fourth strategy is the challenging strategy or the challenger strategy. And this is energy that pulls from the legs and the pelvis up and out. The positive aspects and the gifts of this strategy is that people in the challenger strategy have really big energy. They have a powerful will. They have lots of charisma, and they're mentally strong. They're competent. They're resourceful. They're sort of like everybody has leadership, but they're sort of the ones at the front usually. And they have difficulty with trusting other people, of containing themselves because they tend to take up a lot of space, and they don't take up just their space, but they take up space that's beyond them, and they sort of start cutting into other people's space. Challengers seek safety through power, and they tend to reject their own vulnerability. So people in the challenger strategy, they idealize power and they tend to dominate and control others. And you see this a lot in leadership. The leaders of the world, I would say, have a lot of challenger strategy. And look, I have a lot of challenger strategy too. And it's the one that I have the toughest seeing because it feels so close to who I am. And so I'm always having to check that one. That's the one that I'm having to track the most. So the typical parent here, the wounding environment was that one parent was seductive. Usually it's the same-sex parent, making the child feel special. And then the other parent was perhaps authoritarian and might have maybe humiliated the child or cut down the child's sense of specialness. So the wounding here is interpersonal. And I think what's important to note here is that there were moments in the child's life where they actually experienced survival fear. They were in situations where maybe they were really, really afraid and there was no one there to help them. And so they had to will the self to survive. And so that's important for me to hear, because when I get activated by somebody else's challenger strategy, when I see that there's somebody taking up space, a lot of space or more space, that tends to activate me. And I have to remember, it helps me to remember that this comes from a wounded place. And it doesn't mean that we don't set boundaries or that we get into like this compassion prison stuff, but it helps to really reframe it and to really understand it from a place of vulnerability. So the effect of the wound is that people in the challenger or who use a challenger strategy tend to feel powerful, but they also tend to feel alone because they fear their own vulnerability. They fear being betrayed. They cut off or deny their own needs. And sometimes they engage in active aggression. So very willful people, like it's just a matter of will. These are people who like will push past themselves, will roll over their slow or vulnerable parts to get the job done. And the default emotion here is anger. Like anger fuels a lot of what they do. They fear trusting other people. You doubt your capacity to feel safe or your right to feel safe. There's a fear of weakness. There's a fear of betrayal. And there's a fear of trusting and letting go. And part of the work for this strategy is really about surrender and receiving help. It's a really big deal. So again, pausing for a moment and feeling in your body, like where that lives. And so here we are with the fifth and last strategy, and it is the rigid strategy. And this is a strategy of energetic constriction, right? So there's a, right? It's different from the creative strategy that is more about containment, like holding all these fragments together, right? With like tape or something. This one is about like, think of it as like a mesh armor that holds, that tightens, that restricts sexuality, that restricts love. It's just about like tightening around it, almost like a little bit of a straitjacket, energetic straitjacket. So the positive aspects and gifts of this strategy is that people in the rigid strategy really appreciate and create order and beauty wherever they go, right? They are able to really appreciate form and structure. They are the high achievers, they're high functioning. And, we need people like that in the world, to like the logic people, to come up with some ideas or structures of how to do things, how to move things forward. Where they experience difficulty, where you might experience difficulty is in feeling your emotions all the way and trusting yourself. And I think I wanted to stop here for a second, because the rigid strategy is actually the most common strategy. And everybody has a little bit of everything, but the rigid strategy is the most popular, let's say, because it is also the wound of white supremacy, because white supremacist culture is all about function over feeling, about doing versus being, and that is precisely the wound of the rigid strategy. So there's a seeking of safety through containing and correcting the self. I see this so much. This is the one that I really want to like. Was the hardest for me to well, it was the first strategy that I really began to dismantle when I was in my program. And thank goodness, because we would be sitting in a circle and I would have something to say, and then I would be editing what I was going to say as I was sitting there, and then the moment would pass and then I wouldn't get to say anything. So that this is sort of like a micro example of how it might show up, because I was like correcting myself. I was like editing what I was saying, and I was cutting off my spontaneous expression. So in this strategy, you might control your experiences by referencing external rules, like, is this appropriate? Is this allowed? Can I do this? Versus, I want to do this. I desire to do this, right? So they think about actions, or you may think about actions as being right or appropriate. And it's a rule-bound existence. And that's where sort of the mesh armor comes in. So there's a difficulty with feeling the emotions, and in the parenting process or in the experience of growing up, the home environment, there was value of function over feeling. This can also arise through really chaotic parenting or chaotic environments where there was little structure and emotional safety. And then the child needed to create the structure in order to feel safe and okay within their own bodies. So this wounding is interpersonal and it's spiritual. So the child was taught, or you may have been taught, to ignore or distrust your inner experiences and to trust external rules and forms. And there's a fear of your own experience. There's a fear of like I'm experiencing something, I'm not sure to trust it, I'm not sure I can go with it. And so there's a disconnection from intuition. And that's why the wound is spiritual. The wound is on a spiritual level or in a spiritual dimension, because there's a separation from intuition. This is why a lot of us, we doubt what we feel. We don't go with what we feel because we think we might be wrong. And there is a lot, actually, the default emotion is partly shame, but it's also doubt, a lot of doubt about the self and the fear of trusting the self. So, I'll get it back into that for a second. Right, there's a fear of losing control because emotions feel overwhelming, because there isn't that capacity built out to feel. And so a lot of the work is around opening trust around feeling. There's an emphasis on order, on correctness, on performance, on achieving. And there's an illusion that there's an overcoupling of the self with performance, right? So they think, oh, I am my performance. I am my doing, not my being. I'm not my beingness. I am my doingness. So, oftentimes in this rigid strategy, there's this emphasis. There's a lot of internal criticism and internal judgment, a lot of blame and resentment that also happens in relationship, because what we do to ourselves when we are blaming, resenting, criticizing, and judging ourselves, we also tend to do it externally. We'll do it to our children, or we'll do it to our partners. So in the default emotion of doubt, there's doubting the right to feel, doubting the right to trust yourself, the fear of chaos and disorder, the fear of imperfection. Hello, who doesn't have that? And the fear of surrendering to feelings. So those are the 5 strategies. We started with the creative strategy, the merging strategy, the enduring strategy, the challenger strategy, and the rigid strategy. And just to reiterate, these are constantly moving in the energy matrix, right? All of these patterns, all of these strategies, because we have all of them, are constantly moving in the energy matrix. And then they come into contact with other people's energy matrices. And they come out more under experiences of stress and overwhelm. And we dom them, and I mean this sort of obviously in a playful way. We don't dominate them, but we dom them by tracking them, right? And, a skillful dom, if you're into that, tracks her sub, right? She tracks what the sub is feeling. She tracks the desires and needs of her sub. And in the same way, you are your own dom. You are tracking these energetic strategies and noticing what are the needs underneath, what are the vulnerabilities. I'm glad this was helpful to you, Dee. Yes, thank you. And so that when you track them and you are able to track the needs and desires and the vulnerabilities underneath, you can meet them with devotion and with that attuned presence to the fear that's underneath or the needs that are underneath. And when we heal these, when we open up to these unveil really a broader concept of who we are, because a lot of times we experience ourselves as these strategies, instead of these strategies actually overlay who we are, they obscure who we are, they are not who we are. They are just strategies we employ to deal with fear. And so when we are able to broaden our capacity of who we are, we also are able to deepen our capacity for intimacy and connection, because we know what's happening. We can track it and we can name it. Oh, this is coming in. We have a shared language. We have a language to describe what is happening. All right, so I hope this is helpful. And tomorrow, day 3, we're going to be talking about being a nervous system ninja, which goes together with tracking your energy, being a energy dom. So tomorrow is being a nervous system ninja. So I am so excited to get into that with you tomorrow. All right, bye.